Good evening, family. Like Ella, she said she's from school, so she believes in call and response. I'm from the church, we do the same. And so I am here because we talk a lot about community. It's a word that has been overused, watered down, and sometimes even now is meaningless when we think about where we are, not only as a nation, but as a city. A lot of us have heard the consistent narratives of Chattanooga. We have clean air. We have a booming tech and startup culture. We're 2 times solidified as the most beautiful city in America. And still, when we think about these stories and these narratives, they are often told by a small group of a privileged few. And so, is community really something that we have when we step over a growing population of homeless in our city? Is community something that we have when the fastest growing population of those in poverty are children under the ages of 16? Is community something that we have when we're dealing with a highly displaced and gentrified Black community? Is community something that we have with a prison population busting at the seams? You know, we think about community often from the aspect of how we have founded this nation, that we hold these truths self-evident. Those truths are coming a little bit later. And self-evident means that they don't need any backing up. But we hold these truths self-evident that all men and women are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Do we really have these ideals at the forefront if we have a lopsided community? Those who remain neglected and underserved where we live. You know, last year, during the outbreak of COVID-19, the world came to a screeching halt. And many of us who are used to the commonality of the hustle and bustle of American life were forced to sit still and to grapple with the reality of the Black experience in America. For many of us, we know all too well what it feels like to watch people who look just like us die in the streets. Sandra Bland, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Tatiana Jefferson, and even where we live, Javario Eagle, Leslie Prater, and so many others. We saw the bullets that barraged the apartment of Breonna Taylor. We watched Ahmaud Arbery be hunted down by our very brothers and sisters in the community. And as if that wasn't enough, we saw Elijah McClain, a simple violinist, be murdered as well. And the culmination of it all came with Brother George Floyd. What we thought would be 8 minutes and 46 seconds actually turned out to be over 9. And for many of us who are not African American, we saw what America was. The mask was ripped off and we could not lie about what it is. We watched a Black man get murdered in the street with a knee on his neck simply because he was African American. And so the natural response, of course, is outrage. For many of us, we've seen these instances so long, they become commonplace. And so, being frustrated, we hit the streets. And many people think that the protest, and often how it's painted by the media, was simply because of police violence. But the reality is that was just a spark, as it often is, of the underlying issues of socioeconomic status that is not being addressed, communities that are being racially profiled and policed on a daily basis, communities that are being uprooted for progress without the intentionality of making space that we can build and keep people in the community both at the same time. That progress for Chattanooga does not mean that we wipe out entire groups of people, and then when they choose to speak about their frustration of how they are being treated, we decide to vilify them or to diminish their perspectives. America, as it is right now, and the very reason why I can stand in this room with black and white people is because the people who came before me decided to push back on what America was and make America something that is better right now. They didn't accept drinking out of separate fountains as a community. They didn't accept not being able to have the right to vote as a proper community. They chose not to accept that serving this country and then coming back and being called a boy was community. But that community was even speaking truths to power, wearing signs that says, I am a man. And us, as a younger generation, taking those same instances, those same perspectives, the same story that is already being told, and telling it again in a modern context, that we desire to shape a new Chattanooga that is welcoming for all kinds of individuals, regardless of whether or not you come from the west side or the south, regardless of whether or not you went to GPS or East Ridge or Brainerd, but simply because we're all human. We're Americans and we're neighbors. And so, what does community necessarily look like as we push forward? For us, last year, it was changing public policy. It was pushing for the police department to be different in how they treated us when they come into our communities. It was also advocating for behavioral health and mental health response when people just decide to dial 911. And even after we solidified policy changes, we're now going to have allocated budgeting for mental and behavioral health response. The reality of what I grappled with over the last year as I thought about the protest up until now is that even with changing public policy, even with proper budget allocation with a few services, the reality is that life for so many Chattanoogans is standing still as we move forward. And is that the kind of community that we want to continue to live in? Where we move forward and only tell the best of what we have without challenging ourselves to look at what the worst of what we're doing? Are we going to continue to lie as if this city is not built on systemic oppression of various groups of people, from the Yuchi to the Muskogee, to the slaves who lived on the North Shore, all the way until the Cherokee and even black people right now? To the homeless and our children, we owe so much more than to tell only the best parts. We've got to come up. And so how do we do that? How do we grow up? How do we practice and implement the fact that we hold truths to be self-evident, that we're all equal? And that means equality or equity means that I'm not just treated the same, I got the same access as you, the same opportunities, the same space for me. And so how do we create that for my people? We need not be ashamed about our history. Slavery might have been one of the worst parts, but we survived. And we owe it to ourselves to be proud of the foundation that our ancestors have laid before us. And so we must work together with one another despite our differences, because the reality is that many of the rights that have been afforded to so many have come from the direct work of black women, black men, and even black youth. So we must continue to do that work. We are one of the main cores of actually living out the experimentation of what it means to have a democracy, self-governance, and people deciding to challenge a system, to rise to the occasion of viewing me not as an object, but as a human. For my entitled white counterparts, and even for the people who choose to gatekeep for the system, the reality is that keeping people at an arm's distance is the most dangerous thing that we could ever do. We are disservicing one another by not understanding the value of perspectives of your life and mine. We have a common and shared history that is complex, but nonetheless, it's ours. And yes, you did not create this system in your benefit. Trust me, I get it. But nonetheless, it was created for you. And it is your job to use the context of American history to decide that you want to revamp this system to not only give you access, but credence to bring in all others and make a place for them so that they can lay down roots and have a legacy. And for all others who might not have been addressed within the white and black aspect, because America is us all. Assimilation, keeping your head down. The idea that if I say nothing, choose to do nothing, that somehow I am not complicit in the injustices that are happening. Those same Cherokee who were one of the 5 civilized tribes were also some of the most disenfranchised in our country. So upholding the system doesn't benefit you for long, because the reality is, as James Baldwin will put all the time, we're countrymen. And so the most disenfranchised eventually will destroy the same country if we refuse to look at where we are and decide to work together to undo where we have been. And my father is back there. He's a preacher. And so preachers often use an analogy to bring it all together so you can shout hallelujah. And don't forget to put something in the collection plate. But I think I was thinking about an analogy that would bring it all together about where do we go from here? How can we have a different society and a different life, a different new history that we are forging, a new Chattanooga that is rising out of this moment? And so I went to the Greek mythology and I looked at a phoenix. In the Greek mythology, the phoenix lives for 500 years. It can only live that long. And in order for the phoenix to transition into a new life, it realizes at the closure of 500 years, it must die. And so the phoenix accepts that it can no longer continue to live as it did with the same perspective and system that benefited it, but that it must destroy even itself so that it can rise and live again. And so it says that the phoenix will build a house. And then the phoenix will put all of its items in that house. And then once secured, the phoenix will strike its beak on a rock and set itself on fire. And as if that's not enough, that it's burning, it wants to ensure that it smolders till there is nothing left. So the phoenix bellows its wings to engulf itself in flames. And if you look at the story, you would have to believe in a very small frame of context, surely that bird that was just burning in fire, that turned to dust, could not live again. But as the story goes, the phoenix, though destroyed in one aspect, after it is dead, it is given a new life. And that phoenix rises from the ashes with a new purpose, a new perspective. And all of the old has been cast away, and there is something new created for the future. Many of us are afraid to let go of, I think Ella talked about it, old legacies, things that we have picked up and inherited from some of our ancestors, people in politics, and certain personalities. But what if we chose to burn it all down? And I don't mean that I'm inciting a riot. But what if we chose to burn down the systems that did not benefit all of us within Chattanooga? What if we chose to fight, all of us, for space for everyone in community? What if we chose better housing for the homeless, better education for the children, better opportunity from those from underserved communities? What if we chose to invest in conservation, because not only do we all deserve to live here, we all deserve to experience the beauty of what Chattanooga is physically. And so I want you to feel encouraged that letting go of what is the past is not an absolute death. It is an opportunity to forge a new path of where do we go from here into a bright future that is a Chattanooga not for a few or the privileged, but a Chattanooga for each and every one of us. I'm going to end with a call and response. We would do this every time we would end a protest. We would exalt the words of Assata Shakur. And so I'm going to say it, and I'm going to ask that you repeat after me. It is my duty to fight for my freedom.
It is my duty to fight for my freedom.
It is my duty to win.
It is my duty to win.
We must love and support one another.
We must love and support one another.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
Thank you.